Jackie, let's turn now to the Democratic perspective on COVID mandates and the economy. Joining us is California Congressman Brad Sherman. He's also a member of the House Financial Services and Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thank you very much for being with us on Saturday. Let me just get your first reaction. We've had record number of cases across the country in California, a state that's been very tough on measures, but really from California all the way to the East Coast, every state seems to be suffering a soaring number of Omicron cases. You heard your colleague, Congressman Mo Brooks, in the previous conversation criticizing the administration's handling of it. How do you see things?
I think we've politicized a biological crisis that's hitting the entire world. And we've done it unnecessarily, and we've done it in a way that's really hurt our country. I think we'd have a much higher vaccination rate if we hadn't politicized the vaccine. And I think that because of the politicalization, people are particularly tired, they'd be tired anyway, of the fact that this virus has gotten stronger against us. We had the first variant, then we had Delta, then now Omicron. And so people saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and then the virus got more contagious and partially evading vaccines. We need to buck it up, to get our booster shots, which less than half of Americans have gotten, and to get the politics out of it and to get the science in it.
Congressman, you raise a really interesting point. We saw just a few weeks ago former President Trump getting actually booed at a conservative conference for saying, supporting the vaccine and getting the booster. Do you think that this administration, the White House, would be served well by reaching out to former President Trump, try and get him on board, do some PSAs, do something where you see the previous president and the current president imploring the remaining unvaccinated to go out and get the jab?
We have a budget for PSAs and paid advertising. And while I usually don't want to see federal money spent on Fox, I can't think of a more effective commercial than one on this network with Trump telling people to get vaccinated. That's the biggest pool of unvaccinated people, and he's the strongest advocate. And while I praise him very rarely for him to finally step forward, which he should have done a year ago, and finally step forward, and to get booed by some of his own people, and to say, get vaccinated, is a message that should be repeated on this network over and over again.
Speaking of messaging, I want to draw your attention to, we've had mixed messaging coming from the CDC, has confused a lot of Americans. Here's a little snippet of sort of what we've seen from Director Walensky. Listen.
If it was positive, we still know the maximum amount of transmission was behind you. We still wanted you to wear a mask. If it's positive, stay home for another 5 days. If it's negative, I would say you still really need to wear a mask. You still may have some transmissibility ahead of you. You still should probably not visit grandma. You shouldn't get on an airplane.
Congressman, do you think they need to retool their messaging?
Well, I think that this is so complex that you need to publish a chart, and people can only look on that chart to see which circumstances apply to them. When you try to cover something of this complexity in a few seconds on television and say, you know, if you got the disease, but you have this symptom, but it's been 3 days and you tested positive on a PCR and negative on an antigen test, you've got to lay that out in a simple chart. Speaking of the CDC, just an hour and a half ago, you had Dr. Redfield on, and I think he made an awful lot of sense. That the most important thing we can do on this disease is to get vaccinated and boosted, and that might turn out to be a fourth shot. That's a lot of vaccine, but we're up against a powerful and crafty virus.
We are indeed. In just the time I've got remaining, about a minute left, I had to get your thoughts because we're in 2022 now. That means less than a year from the midterms. How do you see the Democrat agenda playing out this November? Your Republican critics obviously pointing to the soaring inflation, the administration's shortcomings on COVID. But what is the case to be made for the Democrat candidates?
Look, we've had $4.6 trillion of extraordinary spending, unpaid for spending as a result of COVID. Most of that was signed into law by Trump. A smaller portion was signed into law by Biden. On this station, you can blame Biden for the inflation. You can blame Trump for the inflation. The fact is, neither is applicable. We have inflation in Germany, France, Britain. Our inflation is just a tad higher than the average for the other rich countries in the world. They don't have Trump. They don't have Biden. They do have COVID. This thing has disrupted the world economy. It's made it tough all over the world. And only in America would we think it's all about us. It's not. It's about the virus, and it's affecting the world.
And hopefully it gets better. Congressman Brad Sherman, we look forward to having you back as we get closer to those midterms. Thank you, sir.